We use it for status rather than life enrichment. A relationship to money where we're not really sure how much of it we actually need.
When you look at money, what do we get wrong about money when it comes to our well-being?
Generationally, we're way wealthier than anyone was 1,000 years ago. We actually spend less time with our family than people do in impoverished countries.
Welcome back to the Potential Podcast. My guest today is Rolf Potts. You know, most of us, we're waiting for something, waiting until we have enough money, enough time, enough of whatever we think we're missing. My guest, Rolf, he's spent 30 years making the case that waiting is the actual problem. He's traveled to over 70 countries, taught at Yale, Penn, and written the classic Vagabonding, the story that changed how a generation thinks about freedom and what it actually means to live on our own terms. He's also the author of The Vagabond's Way. Before we head into this episode, if you could please subscribe to YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, we'd enjoy that. And now, I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation with Rolf Potts. Rolf, welcome to the show.
Good to talk to you, Sean.
It is such a pleasure to talk to you. I have read your book many times, going through those pages and thinking about the lessons, the insights in this book, and to have the author here with me today is such a pleasure.
Cool. It's a topic I love talking about, so I'm keen to lean in.
All right. Well, a book of yours that I didn't read was the 7-Year-Old Dinosaur book. When you look back at the budding author of 7 years old, what do you think you would say to that version of Rolf now after all these years and written several books since then?
I'd say good job. You know, I think if you fact check that dinosaur book, its scientific information was lacking. And I hand illustrated that with crayons. And so the illustrations weren't great, and I was basically copying other dinosaur books. But I think there's a certain fearlessness that you have when you're 7. Like, nobody told me that I could or dissuaded me from writing a dinosaur book. So when I was 7 in the first grade, I wrote a 75-page dinosaur book just because I felt like it, you know? And so I like even though that book probably doesn't stand up scientifically, I like the unself-consciousness and utter confidence that I had back then. And, yeah, so I would applaud him and say, you did good and you set me in a good direction.
You know, that curiosity or that self-confidence from our childhood, I say from our childhood, I wish it would continue on, but for whatever reason, it gets snuffed out. And your answer just made me think about how important it is to really harness, if you have kids or even ourselves, that childlike curiosity.
Yeah, I think there's a reason it sort of gets trained out of you, you know, that you have to be efficient and you can't just go chasing the rainbows of your 7-year-old self forever and ever. You have to have, schedules and you have to do things that aren't as fun as writing dinosaur books. But I think just that curiosity, that wide open, we can do anything with our day attitude is a great thing to remember. And I think it's pretty easy these days to fret about young people who live their lives, it seems, through screens and technologies that didn't exist when I was young and writing that book with crayon and paper. But I think even though there's some shortcomings in that technological constraint, kids are still kids. I mean, it's an exciting way of being in the world, and I think it's always good to stay in touch with your 7-year-old self. Even if that, doesn't mean being, completely out of control, but just sort of open and seeing the world with eyes of wonder, I think.
That seeing the world with eyes of wonder. It's an important thing. So you grew up in Wichita, Kansas?
Wichita, Kansas, yeah.
Kansas?
I'm trying to think what the Canada equivalent of that would be. It's, someplace out on the prairie, right? Some medium-sized Winnipeg or something.
Okay. You're creating unresearched dinosaurs books as a normal 7-year-old would. What else did the world look like from your lens in the way that you grew up?
Well, I think that I didn't really see the world as my place to travel in. I didn't know anybody who had a passport when I was young. Um, and it seemed like being able to wander the world at will was sort of something that people did in adventure stories. It's what Indiana Jones did, or it's what wealthy people who lived on the coast did, but it wasn't something that I thought I had permission to do. And so I traveled more in my imagination than I did um, in the corporeal world when I was young. I didn't see the ocean until I was 15. Um, and I didn't have a passport till I was 25. I often have to remind readers of that, who feel stressed out in their early 20s for not having traveled enough. It's like I didn't even have a passport to leave North America until I was in my mid 20s. And I'd like to feel I've done pretty well in the ensuing years, in the 30 ensuing years since I first got my passport.
Just a little travel, huh?
Just a little bit, yeah. No, and so I think it's not a contest. I think whenever you start,
Mhm.
you can find ways to travel the world in earnest. And yeah, actually, having just been in Europe quite recently, it was interesting to go back to that place and just sort of see this place that I once dreamed about, see these places that I dreamt about, and sort of seeing them on the other side of those dreams. Having traveled so many places, it's still exciting to experience.
It never gets old. You mentioned you don't have a passport till you're 25. A lot of times when we're growing up and maybe we start to think travel can be something that we personally can do, there's this resistance that comes up around money. Can I afford it? Do I need to go make money? When you were getting to your latter teens to your early 20s, what was your relationship with money? What did it look like?
Well, it was a very conservative relationship with money because I was raised by a Kansas farm girl who sort of lived the oldest of six kids in a family with a lot of money. And her idea towards money was that you should save it and scrimp it because you never know when the next thunderstorm or tornado is going to come in and wipe everything out. And so I was, and I continue to be fairly conservative with spending my money. And so in a way, that was a constraint that kept me maybe from traveling when I was a little bit younger, but it also taught me to look for ways to get more out of what money I had. And in the world of independent travel, there's a ton of ways to do that. And as I got older and had more experiences, I found out that really you don't need to throw your money at your travels, which is sort of a misunderstanding. I think too often we're encouraged to see travel as a consumer experience that we buy in the manner that we buy shampoo or icicle or popsicles, right? When in fact you can find ways to give travel to yourself,
Uh,
and sometimes that's just a matter of traveling in local economies that themselves foster not tourism but transportation across landscapes. And so one thing I really discovered when I first started vagabonding Asia in earnest across Southeast Asia was that I could stay in hotels where Thais stayed in Thailand or ride on buses that Burmese people rode in Burma and actually live day-to-day life much cheaper than if I lived back home, even in an inexpensive place like Kansas.
mhm. Not only are you living cheaper, but you're integrating with the people of Thailand or wherever you are.
Yeah. And that I think that's another rhetoric that's used by the travel industry, and I don't want to disparage the travel industry too much because they enable a lot of parts of travel. But there's often these tours where it's like, oh, you can meet the locals. You can spend an afternoon with a dance performance by these people who live here. And it's like, well, you can also ride on the same buses as them, eat at the same restaurants as them, go to the same festivals as them. And guess what? Hospitality is a human virtue, and
Mhm.
you don't need the permission of the travel industry to have access to these other cultures. And so I think that you can respectfully and mindfully live as a local for a while as a traveler. Sometimes that's the most enjoyable way to do things.
Mhm. It's making me think of a time my wife and I were much younger and traveled across India on f- zigzagging, actually, on the lowest or the inexpensive train ticket. However, the conversations or the attempt of conversations that we had and the charades on those train rides really taught us a lot about the culture, even though not many words were exchanged.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And there's trains are sort of an institution in India. It's a big train travel
Hmm.
country. And you travel in those cheap compartments, and it's funny. You meet so many people, and people are so generous and friendly, but they also sort of know that you don't know the rules. Like once I rented a bed, and technically it was supposed to be my bed, and I kept waking up with other people sitting on it. They just thought, well, this guy isn't going to kick me off the bed because he doesn't know what's going on. And they ended up being great people, but it's just like it's different. The rules, personal space, and the rules for everything are a little bit different in another culture. Oftentimes in the best way, as I'm sure you discovered.
Yeah. So you write this book, and it's been enduring. I mean, we're still talking about it today. People are still buying the book today. When you look with hindsight, what was it about this book, do you think, that wasn't just a travel book, but rather this enduring book that people are still talking about, still buying? If you could put your finger on it, what do you think it was?
Well, I think I wrote, I didn't write a how to travel book. There's a lot of how to travel in Vagabonding, but it's more of a why to travel book. And I think even my publisher didn't realize what they were getting. I think oftentimes companies like publishers, they like the same but different aspect. They sort of want you to do a slightly different version of what's out there. But I don't think there were that many why to travel books. And I think there was sort of this middle to upper middle class assumption among travel books that it just assumed that travel was a birthright for a certain number of people, and here's how you do it. Mm-hmm. Well, I was so grateful. I mean, I was middle class, but certainly not upper middle class. But I was sort of provincial middle class, Kansas, USA. I was so grateful that I had done it that I think the gratitude suffuses the book, and then also the philosophies, because I mean, there were travel guidebooks and travel writers that inspired me, but it was also poets. It was Walt Whitman or naturalists like John Muir. That there's a philosophical core that I think that a lot of how to travel books didn't have, because there's this assumption that, well, of course you're going to travel, and here's how you do it. Well, my book was like, no, you're going to be dead someday. This is why you travel. Mm-hmm. This is why this can make your life more enriched and exciting.
You mentioned you're going to be dead one day. I mean, this is the truth for all of us. You talk about, I think it was 2019. Was that the motorcycle? I don't know the year. There was a motorcycle crash. Then I've heard you talk about the pandemic hitting. Your mother, unfortunately, passed away last year. There's a lot of mortality, as I was preparing for today. There's mortality in your story that it seems that you embrace. How has this idea of recognizing that mortality is a part of life influenced this philosophy that you have in how you lead your life?
I think it's inseparable from my philosophy. There's the phrase memento mori, the old phrase, remember death, that remember death because that should encourage you to live and not put off your best life for some seemingly more appropriate time. And it was interesting. My mother, the fact that my mother died last year was not a surprise, but it was very affecting. It hit me pretty hard, and I think that just happens. You only lose your mom once, but it's the memento mori philosophy actually comes through her family line, because when her father, my grandfather, was about time to retire, he got the word that his wife had dementia, had Alzheimer's disease, and he wasn't really able to enjoy his free time in the way that he had hoped. He'd been farming since he was 15 years old, farming full time since he was 15 years old. And so he couldn't enjoy his retirement. I mean, not that he necessarily dreamed of traveling the world, but he just couldn't enjoy it. He'd spent his last days taking care of my grandmother. And so these things are all connected. That there's an inevitability of things. I knew my mother was going to die eventually. She also had dementia, but that it was very affecting. And I think I'm just grateful that I have been aware of that memento mori aspect of life from a young age, as sort of mournful as it was that taught me that lesson. I just think that I have tried my best not to take anything for granted, and I've tried to live in new ways. And travel has been the way of manifesting that. And every time I travel, I'm reminded of why I love travel. Vagabonding doesn't say that everybody has to travel, but I think the concept of time wealth, which is what underpins this all, is the idea that you can be wealthy. Like historically, we're North Americans are the most wealthy generation in world history, right? Yet somehow we don't live lives that are fully rich in time, and that we accumulate possessions without really having time to enjoy them. That we actually spend less time with our family than people do in impoverished countries. It's amazing that I'll go to Indonesia or Kenya or Romania. Actually, I haven't been to Romania, Austria. That people spend time with their family in ways that for all of our wealth in North America. Um, Sometimes we can't figure out how to do. Like maybe we'll spend 2 hours at our kids' soccer game next week, but we just don't have open-ended time to enjoy with our kids. So I want to underscore the fact that it's not just about travel. Travel is my metaphor, and travel is a great metaphor because life is a journey, and the great stories of world history are about the hero's journey, right? But I think time wealth is just about, well, what's really important to you? You're only alive for so many years, for so many weeks, for so many days. How are you going to spend those days and weeks and years?
Hmm. You know, your answer gave me a little bit of chills the way you said, and I wrote it down here. Travel has been a way to manifest that. From my lens, just a reader, I felt drawn to that book is that, yeah, you're not really telling me to go travel. That was a way that, to use your words, you manifest this time wealth, or really paying attention to the unfolding of the days as they come by us. That's what really spoke to me. Um, and this idea of time wealth over money wealth, that I really appreciate how you talk about that. And you mentioned about poverty, some nations that are much more poorer than Canada or US, they spend more time with their friends and relatives. A previous guest, he did research actually in Greenland and India about people's just baseline levels of happiness, and that was in the moment. And they were happier in terms of, I spent time with my friends yesterday. We went to church or some sort of spiritual gathering together than the US. That was the other side of the coin. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, no, when I was a young traveler, I would be in countries with less money than the US. I'd be in Cambodia, just as one example. And some of the getting to know you conversation anywhere in the world is they sort of try to figure out how old you are, where you're from, and what your family status is. And so, like, I was 28, 29 years old. They're like, "Oh, are you married?" And I said, "No," which is just sort of like, "No, I'm traveling the world." And they're like, "Oh,
Hmm.
I'm sorry." Like, their system for wealth is you get married and you have a family, and that's fine. And there's reasons why I didn't get married and have a family in my 20s, but just their cultural instinct was to feel bad for me. This wealthy American, this comparatively wealthy American, was poor in family. And so I think that's one thing that I continue to become rich in. I've been rich in travel for a long time, but I got married almost 5 years ago, and I'm sort of insinuating myself as a community member here in Kansas in a way that I didn't properly allow myself to. And that's a form of wealth too, knowing your neighbors and
Hmm.
giving back to the places that have given to you.
You mentioned that you didn't allow yourself previously. What was stopping you?
Well, I was traveling the world and I was keeping my options open, right? Um, and but I think also that my line of sight was insufficiently local. I wasn't really making friends in Kansas because I was making friends on the other side of the world. I wasn't um, necessarily seeking a love life here. I was dating women in New York and London and places like that. And then that sort of everything colluded when I met Kiki, my wife. She's from Kansas, yet she's lived all over the world, and a lot of her initial questions early in our relationship are like, "You don't realize there's a bakery in the town 20 minutes away from
Mm,
where we are? You've gone to the grocery store to buy sliced bread, but you've never been to the bakery." And then within a matter of months, she had more local friends than I did, and I realized I needed to step up my game. That I had impoverished myself, to use that wealth metaphor. I had impoverished myself of community, and I had this virtual community that I love and continue to love. But um, I think even though the virtual world allows us to build those virtual communities, I don't think it's good to do that at the expense of your actual community where you are. We can be
mhm.
so mobile that sometimes we forget about the wisdom that a given landscape can offer us, and so that's something I'm still learning. I have a lot of stamps on my passport. I have a lot of stories from all over the world, but I'm still just past my baby steps of being a local member of North Central Kansas, and it's a lot of fun.
Find it very interesting. So you have this. guy writing a dinosaur book at 7 years old. You take your North America first trip. I think it was 8 months or so. Then you do your vagabonding trip of long, slow travel. You write this book, and here you are. I don't know how old you are. I think you're in your mid-50s, and there's a different type of travel that I'm hearing coming up, and it's travel in your local community. You mentioned the hero's journey earlier. I can't help but see this arc of both of you go out in the world, experience what you have to experience, probably hit mental crossroads, and you're coming back home, so to speak. And here you are still continuing travel, just in perhaps, I don't want to say deeper way, but what would you call it? What kind of travel is this? I was going to say deeper, but I don't want to put new words or words in your mouth.
Well, it's maybe, I don't want to put words in my mouth either, but what came to mind when you were talking is first half of life, second half of life. Richard Rohr wrote this book called Falling Upward, which is wisdom for the second half of life. He talks about how the first half of your life is like this vessel that you build, and people, especially in North America, forget that there's the second half of life. And they spend their whole life just building a bigger and bigger vessel, but forgetting to fill it with anything, right? And so the idea is that Odysseus, one example of the hero's journey, he goes off, travels the world, fights in a war, comes back, and then he has to, kill his wife's suitors and become a part of his home again. That the journey is not over when he lands back at Ithaca. He has to keep traveling. And so I think the second half of life is the reward of the first half of life, all those adventures and making yourself and creating success, maybe in a material or professional way, is only as valuable as what you do with it in your second half of life. And oftentimes that's a matter of giving back to your community. The hero's journey is about, it's not about the young man who goes off and, has adventures and then spends his whole life having adventures and dies on the other side of the world. Although I'm sure that happens sometimes. But it's about him bringing the wisdom of the world back home and mentoring younger people himself and joining the conversation. And in the case of world travel, just saying, well, no, actually, I've been to Egypt. I've been to India. I can assure you that, what you're reading in whatever news website you're reading is sort of an exaggeration. And so I think it's a very important thing. And people oftentimes, especially in North America, talk about travel as an irresponsible thing. But I think that they're forgetting the conversation that happens in that hero's journey aspect, that the person who comes back isn't necessarily better, but they have experiences that the people who stayed home don't. And so just as in becoming a member of my Kansas community again, I'm getting wisdom from my own community, I have some wisdom to share with them, and so it's nice. Kiki, you mentioned that we both traveled the world. We both had our hero's journeys that led back home. She's doing a lot of mentoring and she's an actor and filmmaker, and so she's supporting filmmaking and acting back in our local community in a way that is good for her and for our community.
I really appreciate that. And I love this container of life, the first half and the second half. And your idea of coming back and you emerge from the hero's journey and there's this transformation, and a lot of listeners on our podcast are in their 40s and 50s, and they're at this maybe precipice or this transition from the container that they built to the second container, like to bear the fruits, like you mentioned. When you look at your container, when it cracked open or when it opened, what did you notice was coming out of it? Or what was pouring out of that container the first time you really noticed, like, ooh, there's a change here?
Well, metaphorically, it's not a pouring out, it's a pouring in, right? That you have this container and you fill it with your life. And so I had my successful book, I'd had my world travels, but then you pour back in. And I think one blessing of my situation before I was married is that I did live close to my family. My parents were my next door neighbors for a long time, and I miss my mom terribly now, but I can be heartened by the fact that when I was stateside, I was spending time with her. And that virtue was encouraged by, again, these non-wealthy countries, non-air quotes wealthy countries that I've been to before, that you spend time with your family because you're not always going to have your family. And so I think I poured a lot of family juice into my vessel early on, but then I didn't really see beyond the circle of family, that I wasn't really reaching out further into. I was developing relationships with people on the other side of the world or on the coasts more so than I was in the middle of the country. And so I continue to try and become a part of the community that I'm in. I just joined the board of a local theater here. I'm in the board member stage of my life, but it's it's cool because I have experiences that go beyond the purview of where I live that can maybe make their theater more dynamic in their own way, and then it allows me to root myself and give back to an institution in my local community that I am really proud of, and yeah, so this will continue to be a thing. I think that I think it's possible. I think there's sort of an early man or woman idea that you can go out and accomplish things and just continue to conquer the world, to use a certain metaphor. But I think there comes a point at which you have to sort of be more humble and more quiet and enjoy what you've accomplished out in the world and start to give back to people who are not yourself and sort of start to speak to other generations or even people without similar experiences to you and just sort of listen and talk to them and broaden the wealth that you have. I think also there's sort of a totalizing way of thinking. We keep score with money when it comes to wealth. And so we think that you fill the vessel with gold and then you're rich. Well, actually, it's an ongoing thing. I think the different forms of wealth, be it family wealth or community wealth, or the different manifestations of time wealth, it's not something where you can dust your hands off and say you won. That you keep trying to make yourselves rich. You keep trying to find things that can enhance your relationship with the world. I was walking with my wife on a property the other day, and I'm here, and she's here. Oh, that's an eastern meadowlark, and I'm like, really? I didn't know that. I didn't know a bird song from my own stretch of land. So I think one way that I can become wealthier in my relationship to the world is being a traveler of my own 30 acres. Of sort of getting to know this own space beyond where I sleep every night a little bit better too. So it's multipolar, and there's no silver bullet that makes you wealthy in life. That you can continue to seek wealth in ways that don't cost much.
I often ponder wealth and what it means to be wealthy, and the origin word of wealth is actually well-being, which, I think it expands our level of thinking. As you're talking about this, you have traveled with periods with probably little money, more money. You've seen countries that have lots of money, like in America, versus poverty countries. When you look at money, what do we get wrong about money when it comes to our well-being? From your observations.
We see it as a metric. We use it for status rather than life enrichment. We use it to compare ourselves to other people. And yeah, we sort of have this pathological, might be too strong of a word, but I'm going to say it, a relationship to money where we're not really sure how much of it we actually need. Because we live in a country where, billionaires have 4 houses, one in each time zone, but no time to enjoy them, and I think that there's a certain loneliness that even wealthy people can feel sort of paranoid about their wealth and not really sure who their friends are. And so I think that there's a spiritual hollowness to the idea of wealth as a metric as opposed to wealth that's something that enables you to live the life that you want to live, monetary wealth. And that's at the core of time wealth, that you use whatever wealth you have. And again, like generationally, we're way, way wealthier than anyone was 1,000 years ago. But use what wealth you have to live an engaged life, one that makes your life better and richer and more full of love and community, but also that allows you to give back to your community and to give love back. And so I think that can be easily said as a platitude. It's easy to say, oh, well, money only goes so far and you have to give love. That songs have been written about that. But it's an ongoing process. It's not a silver bullet that just ends at, done, cross it off the list. I'm wealthy now, move on. It's an ongoing conversation with yourself and an ongoing conversation with your community. And that's one good reason to have communities, is that you can have conversations and they can sort of call you on your BS a little bit. Even as you're trying to find ways to keep them honest, so it's a fun conversation. It's I like that. I wrote that down. Well-being as the root of wealth.
Yeah,
because that's absolutely what it's about.
In Canada here, there's David Chilton, his name. He wrote The Wealthy Barber. I don't know if you know that book, but the best Canadian personal finance book out there. He went on to be on Dragon's Den, which is like Shark Tank, but Canada's version. Very nice guy. The first finance book I got when I was 12, but I had him on the podcast, and the guy sold millions of books, and um, he's done well financially and well-being in life. But anyhow, he had said what keeps him grounded, because I asked him about that. He's like, I got friends who buy planes and things like that. He lives in a modest house, but he's like, my high school friends. He's like, the relationship, the community with my high school friends, because they keep me modest, they keep me grounded, and they don't care what I'm doing. They just know Dave, the real Dave. And your comments around the importance of communities and relationships just made me think of, has a huge part of this well-being journey that we're on.
Yeah, no, I've been reading a book called Who Needs Friends by Andrew
Mm.
McCarthy, who many people know him as an actor, but he's been a travel writer for a decade and a half now, and I've become friendly with him. I'm going to moderate his event when he comes to Kansas City later this week. And so I've been reading his book, sort of about the epidemic of loneliness among
Mm.
men and sort of men's inability to navigate friendship in a healthy way. And it's been interesting to read, but I think that he talks about, and I think about too, that sometimes it can be hard to make friends as an adult. That one reason that you're
Mhm.
still friends with your high school buddies is that they've seen your worst. They know your insecurities, they know your vulnerabilities, and so that's out of the way. You're not performing for them, so you can be who you are. That's a nice thing to have. One blessing of travel is that I think travel makes us vulnerable. That when you're on the far side of the world, crossing paths with someone, you're less likely to be defensive and performative because you may never see them again. Well, sometimes that openness to vulnerability leads to good friendships. So I have ongoing friendships with people I've met on the other side of the world. Um, but yeah, again, that's not a silver bullet either. I think that friendships are something that need to be maintained. And in Andrew's book, he takes a road trip across America to meet up with friends he hasn't seen in a long time. And a lot of them are friends from youth or friends from early in his career that were helpful to him, or sometimes mentors who have become friends. And that's another form of wealth,
Mm.
that I think that people can, I think that something that can emerge out of youthful friendships are certain sort of jealousies. If you're keeping scores as friends, someone becomes more wealthy in money or status or family, and so there can be imbalances. And so I think friendships are something that needs to be maintained with a mindful way, just as one's sense for wealth needs to be checked in on every once in a while.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the You Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show. Yeah, they're so important, those friendships. I'm curious, like, you seem to have a great relationship with like this scorecard of money that you mentioned earlier. No, when I say great, and again, I'm putting words in your mouth, but here's my assumptions. But like not desiring and going after all those or trying to get the highest scorecard. How have you been able to wrestle or dance with that desire, if anything at all? Maybe you don't have that, but I know a lot of people I talk to, they're like, yeah, I want to do this. I want to have a better relationship with money, but tomorrow they're just going back after that scorecard.
Well, that's a part of our conversation with my wife and I too. Is that we've been trying to create a life that we love here, and we're actually in a good position. One, because it doesn't cost that much to live in Kansas, and we own our property outright thanks to family inheritance, basically. Um, Yet at the same time, it's like how much of our remaining years on Earth do we want to spend working our butts off to make more money? What are we going to do with that money? Because money comes in really handy. I mean, we were just in
Mhm.
Switzerland and Austria, which are not cheap places to travel, and sometimes I'm not the dirtbag backpacker that I was 30 years ago. Sometimes it is nice to throw a lot of money on a really great dinner with good wine in a beautiful world city. Um, and so you do need money, but yeah, we've also saved some money. Yeah, and so the scorecard aspect, even in personal relation, I think it becomes something that you negotiate. It has to be an active part of the conversation, or else you're just sort of in a lockstep either in spending your money in a certain way or in avoiding spending your money in a certain way. Because I think that I think a middle class compulsion in North America is to save, save, save against that rainy day, against that disastrous possibility. And so sometimes we don't allow ourselves to really indulge ourselves. And so this is also a first half, second half of life thing, is that sometimes we're tempted to indulge ourselves financially early in life, when what we should be doing is indulging ourselves in terms of time wealth. We should be using our youth to really embrace the world. And as you get older and have a more comfortable relationship with money, I think sometimes it's good to think, well, how am I going to spend this money? And so, yes, I will spend money that's going to make me nervous a little bit when I look at my credit card later on, but it's going to be worth it. Yeah. So it's every week, and one great thing about having married the woman I did is this is an active part of our conversation, that we don't talk around it. We try to lean into the idea of how we're going to spend our money, how we're going to spend our time. And it's not a perfect scenario, but even the struggle and the disagreement and the uncertainty is part of the healthy process, I think.
I appreciate how much you've mentioned admiration for Kiki and the lady, the woman that you married. You've mentioned a few different breadcrumbs that you picked a good one for yourself.
Yeah, no, I held out forever. I was a bachelor for a long time. I enjoyed being a bachelor, and then suddenly, yeah, no, it went from like knowing her for 5 minutes to thinking, oh, I guess I'm gonna get married. I'm lucky in that I found my person. And that doesn't make the relationship easy. I mean, there's negotiations and disagreements that are a part of that, but I think that's part of what makes a healthy relationship. Again, it's not a silver bullet type thing, but I think not everybody is going to meet their perfect person. Like I think that I met my perfect person, but you find ways, even with your perfect person, to make things work, even when it seems like things aren't going great. We've been at it for 5 years, and yeah, our relationship started with a conversation, and it's still going. And so I feel really lucky and blessed in that regard.
You've written a relatively new book, The Vagabond's Way, and it seems to very much align with this second half of life in terms more of you talked about a spiritual hollowness earlier, and it seems to be not yourself, just how people can have that. It seems like this book is kind of scratching this more deeper spiritual itch.
Yeah, I think it's an older man's book. It's denser and a little bit more slow paced. I mean, it's a page a day book. It's one day you read and think about one aspect of travel as you read through The Vagabond's Way. But it is, it was written. I think it was started during COVID, when most of my travel was to my front porch to sit with Kiki and talk about what was going on during that day. But I completely agree that the adventures, travel isn't something you cross off your list, and nothing against bucket lists or about like getting that great 2-year journey in your 20s, but it continues to be a thing. And if you've been traveling correctly, then you bring that travel attitude home. And again, like I said, just this week, it's like, oh, really? That was an Eastern Meadowlark. I should know that was an Eastern Meadowlark. Yeah. So it at the core is a spiritual thing. And that's why the Vagabonding sort of ends with a spiritual chapter, it ends with bringing the journey home, but the last on the road aspect of vagabonding is the spiritual nature of the journey. Because, and it's tied into time wealth too, because so much of life is temporal. And so if you think of things that go beyond our temporal lives, if you think about what's really important beyond what our material wealth and pleasure and comfort is, then you can sort of be aware of your own life at a deeper level. Because again, your own life is going to be gone someday.
Knowing your own life at a deeper level. That's important. As we get to know our own lives, or get to know ourselves as people enter their 40s, their 50s, there is this time scarcity. I wouldn't say time scarcity, but they call it midlife crisis for a reason. People start to reconcile with, I only got X amount of time left. As you become older and wiser, are there any things that you're afraid of? And I say this afraid not in a negative way, more or less something that's pointing you to pay more attention to X.
Oh, well, I'm afraid of my own decline, the fact that I can't lift as much weight as I did or run as far as I did a little bit before. And that's tied in, I think that's tied into daily habits. Your habits become your recovery time. Yeah, I'm drinking less and exercising more, or trying to, than I used to, because my body isn't there for me like it was when I was 20, 25 years ago. I don't bounce back, and if I sit around, you know, being idle, then my body is going to deteriorate. It's going to become flabby in a way that it wasn't before, and that's not a solvable condition. My dad is 86. I see him a couple of times a week, more if I'm lucky, and he's just a frail guy. That his goal is to run a 1 mile race, and he's not going to run it. He's going to walk it with his cane, and it's sort of a self-deprecating joke for him, but he's going to do it. But he used to run marathons when he was younger than me, and he can't do that now. And someday I won't be able to do that either. But if I can maintain my body, it's a holistic health thing, and I'm probably not the best expert to even talk about that. But just sort of keeping my physical health in a way that accords to my mental and spiritual health, and my social health, then that's a good thing too. And so that's another part of the conversation with myself that's going on right now. And in fact, probably when I'm done talking to you, I'll probably have to go for a run. Or lift some weights, just because consistency is important in that regard.
Mm. Your dad sounds fantastic. He's doing it with his cane and all.
Yeah, no, and he was a science teacher. He's really into green energy, so he wanted to start this photocopying campaign to inform people about green energy. And I said, Dad, people don't read photocopies. They don't like junk mail. You should start a YouTube channel. So he started a YouTube channel called Energy Green Grandpa.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
And so he's a YouTube influencer with his 200 fans at age 86. But it's a good use of time. There's worse things that one can do in their 80s than make goofy videos about saving energy.
That's great. I mentioned listeners. They might be in their 30s as well, 30s, 40s, 50s. There's this appeal to travel, and I say this a lot of people that I chat with almost from an escapism perspective. And I feel that this vagabonding philosophy that you talk about is more of an attitude, of way of being. But if there's these individuals listening who are like, I got to get out of this. I got to get out of this life that somehow has been concocted around me. What advice would you give them?
Well, one thing I often say is that the journey begins the moment you decide to do it. So even if you feel constrained financially or lifestyle-wise by the idea that you're not going to be able to travel the world soon, well, then once you start saving money and sort of managing your life in such a way that you can make travel happen, well, the journey has begun, and that makes it more fun. Even if you're working in a job that's sort of miserable most hours of the day, the fact that you are funding a journey that will eventually put you at the other side of the world, hiking through the Himalayas or whatever, that makes even the misery seem a little bit more enjoyable. My very first, or one of my first vagabonding funding jobs was landscaping in the greater Seattle area, which I didn't really care for that much, but it was exciting to think that eventually I'd be living in a van and traveling around the country and doing that. So I think that once you decide to travel, then the journey has begun. And every time you decide not to get that $5 cup of coffee because you're going to get 5 cups of coffee on the other side of the world, well, then the journey has begun. And then think about what's important to you, because sometimes people feel constrained by job security, but yet there's ways to negotiate sabbaticals, leave sabbaticals. There's ways to quit. I mean, job security, not everybody works for, General Motors their whole life anymore. And so figure out as you make your vocational journey through the world, which is going to have a lot of changes anyway, think, well, as I jump ship from this job to another one, maybe I'll just leave 9 months in there where I can take a journey I would like to take. And then some people who travel with a mind to vocation sometimes find vocational aspects of travel that enhance their work life, even though they were just out having fun. They were just paying attention to the architecture in the local community. They were, paying attention to food and restaurants, whatever your vocation is, or whatever your dream vocation is. Travel can be this amazing education in deepening your relationship to everything, including your vocational world, the way you make money. Which doesn't mean that everybody has to live their dream profession. Sometimes people just have to put money in the bank. But sometimes that's a good way to make your travels a part of your imaginative life, even as pertains to work.
For these same people, if they were having, if we were having a conversation and I was picking your brain about this travel philosophy and the benefits of travel and what it can do to my perspective and how I see the world, if I end up saying, well, I'm just going to wait till I retire, how would you respond, if anything at all?
Well, waiting till retirement to travel is a respectful and time honored thing, but there's no guarantee,
Mm,
that again, the memento mori thing, but also the life decline thing, you could be in decent health for a 65-year-old when you travel, but why not travel as a 35-year-old? You can do a lot more with your body. You can go a lot further. And actually, there's a lot of badass 65-year-olds, 75-year-olds, probably even 85-year-olds who are doing some amazing things. But you just have so much energy and attention when you're younger that why not, if you can, make it happen? I don't know that I've ever heard from anyone who's ruined their life through taking time off to travel, especially if you start in a nice, wealthy, industrialized country like you have in the U.S. or Canada. If you're a dumbass, if you travel the world and put yourself in dumb situations, maybe you could compromise yourself a little bit. But if you travel in a mindful and careful way, then even bad travel experiences can inform your life in a good way. And yeah, the idea of retirement, it didn't work for my grandfather, right? So that was a no-brainer for me that he'd worked harder than anybody. At age 65, he was ready to retire. He'd been working full-time for 50 years, but he couldn't. He had to take care of his wife. And so there's no guarantees of anything. And so I think it's good to be intentional about what you really dream of doing and not put off these things to seemingly more appropriate times of your life.
mm. Thank you for that. When you think about the lessons that you talk about from vagabonding, which ones most apply to you right now in your current phase of your life?
Probably Probably the idea of putting travel in conversation with home, just because I spend so much
Mm.
more time at home and I'm more community minded now. Um, and one thing I mentioned in vagabonding, which people have said they really appreciated, is the fact that people are going to be less interested in your travels than you are. You're going to come home and you've had all these amazing experiences, and people are going to sort of say, "Oh yeah, Hungary is the capital Budapest or Bucharest, something like if people haven't had your experience, and why should they? Then they're not going to engage your travels at the same level of excitement as you. And so I think right now it's a matter of um being proud of my travels and being excited about my travels, but not in such a way that it makes me into a bore at home. And being able to encourage local people to travel in ways, but also just to sort of listen to the local wisdom that they have, because they're my community members too, and they have wealth. To touch on something we talked about before, they might have wealth in certain aspects of life, like being able to recognize birdsong that I don't have yet. So
Yeah, when you mentioned about just in your area traveling, discovering different parts of your farm, um, I was chatting with someone the other day, and they challenged themselves to just take notice of their neighborhood and the amount of things that he was telling me that he noticed. It was like this tree in the neighborhood. There was this hill that he never ever noticed was in this neighborhood. I think it's really remarkable that when you bring this mindfulness to your area you live, it is a form of traveling.
it absolutely can, and I touched on that a lot in the Vagabond's Way. In fact, I think the last month of chapters in the Vagabond's Way is about becoming a traveler at home, and oftentimes that's a matter of attention. And our wealth of attention, we're very poor in attention right now because algorithms have been programmed to harvest our attention on various smartphone apps and online resources. And I'm not above that. I go on YouTube and the algorithm knows exactly what I want to watch. And pretty soon I'm in, my 45th minute of watching YouTube when I should probably be doing other things. I've been reading a book called The Art of Noticing by Rob Walker, who also has a Substack. I found it through his Substack. And his isn't necessarily a travel book, although there's some travel metaphors in there, but it's about paying attention. It's about almost tricking yourself into paying attention. And I teach a writing course in Paris every summer, and a lot of my exercises, even though it's about travel writing, are about paying attention because sometimes we forget to do that. We were in Paris, so it's like, oh yeah, we're going to go to the Champs-Élysées and see the Eiffel Tower. Well, actually, Paris contains multitudes, and harnessing your attention in such a way that you're not looking at the Yelp reviews of the best places to eat, but you're using your nose to find out places that smell good, or you're just looking at details of the city that you realized that you would have ignored otherwise. When I was in Vienna the other week, I paid a lot of attention to you. I was on my way to the art museum, and I decided I was going to find things that passed as art. And so I would find like ads for plumbers on trucks that were interesting. I would find graffiti, which is very common in Vienna. I would find like the tiles of the street and then realize that there was foliage growing through it. Like the wilderness wants to live even in the middle of this very large European city. And so that was an attention exercise. And it's fun. And as you say, it's something you can do at home, and it's something that can start and continue at home. And it's something I could do a better job of doing. In fact, someday I want to write a travel book about my own 30 acres because I feel like I've been giving my attention to faraway places in a way that has tried to honor those places. And sometimes it's like, well, have you paid enough attention to where you actually are right now? You know that this soil is not great for growing a garden, but you know why? What's the chemical makeup of this soil? I don't know, but maybe someday I will. And that's all tied into attention. I'm not saying that everybody has to know the makeup of their local soil, but if you can find different ways of looking up from your screen and paying attention to where you are, then every moment is a journey. Then you're being curious and you're being attuned to the world and hence to your life.
Well, maybe I'm just paying attention right now, or it just happens that you're having this conversation with me after I just had one this morning with Dr. Ellen Langer. She's Harvard's first tenure professor, but her whole new book is about noticing, like exactly what you're saying, that, and how like a mindful life is not on the cushion. A mindful life is paying attention to your 38 acres or what's on your acres, not assuming 1 + 1 is 2 all the time, because there could be some different contexts. And she talks how often we're just mindless by assuming we know, or assuming the stories that we've been told are final. So anyways, your comment really made me think of that.
Do you know the name of her book?
Yeah, The Mindful Body.
The Mindful Body? I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, she's fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, you have your new book, 366, is it? 66?
Yep.
Yeah. There's one extra day in the USA.
Right. Well, we have leap year. I didn't want to.
Leap year. Yeah. Okay. What happened to you when you did those 366 meditations?
Well, one, I mean, I was on the creation end rather than the consumer end. So, like, it started out as 10,000 possible meditations, and it really became a matter of commonplacing. And if you know what a commonplace book is, it's like a compendium of your learning. It started during the Renaissance, when back before personal book ownership was very common. If people read something interesting, they would transcribe it into their commonplace book so they could remember it. And that was mixed in with drawings and personal journal entries and things like that. And so for years as a traveler going into writing The Vagabond's Way, I'd been keeping all these ideas about different aspects of travel. And so I boiled those down into what became 366 meditations on how travel plays out. And I think I just actually, maybe it was auto-suggested about what we've just been talking about, but it's sort of about attention. It feels like it's about if you feel the urge to travel, you should probably pay attention to that, because there's a reason why you're feeling that urge to travel. And it might be dumb, it might go on the other side of the world, and what inspired you to go to Fiji is completely different from what you experience in Fiji in a good way. But you should pay attention to that travel urge, because that is your life telling you something that you should listen to. And then through the journey, paying attention to every aspect of the journey, including the fact that a long-term journey is going to deepen. You're going to be less excited by the things that initially you get excited about, because you're going to be used to novelty. But that's when travel really gets interesting. That's when you slow down and you seek to live as a local in a certain environment, and then taking that attention back home. So, yeah, I feel like I feel like my answer was given by what we were just talking about. But I think it really is about attention, and we live in the attention economy, that our attention is being monetized. We don't pay for anything except with our attention. That we have all these apps that are free, but they're only free insofar as they've been designed to make us want more of them. And that's a struggle I have every day. I have some great online services that I probably use too much. Yeah, so I think that's what it came down to was attention, and then sort of the spiritual, existential ramifications of what you pay attention to in life.
I've done some traveling, not to your level, but we made it around the world. And as you're saying this, I feel like it doesn't have to be travel, of course, but traveling, wherever it is, gives you this ability to pay attention. Everything's new. All this stimuluses are heightened, and it's almost a superpower. I'm just thinking, like, how much time seems to go by in a week if I'm traveling, like actually traveling in somewhere new, or we went away for a year and a half. It seemed like 17 years. And I'm really feeling this sense of travel gives us a way to pay attention in our lives when we come home.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Um, Yeah, I think neurologically time slows down when we travel, and that's tied into novelty. They say that if you crash your bike, your memory of that experience slows down. I think because it's such an extraordinary situation. Well, travel is an extraordinary situation. It takes you out of your habits and routines. It takes you out of things that make your home life more efficient, but actually make you pay less attention to your life in general. And that's one blessing that travel gives you. It's funny when you said travel lean, you emphasize the second syllable. I thought you meant like travel lean, like Lean, like
Yeah.
traveling close to the bone, traveling skinny. And I thought, well, and part of my mind is like, yes, exactly. I think that if you make travel a little bit less comfortable, like not intentionally uncomfortable, but if you do pay for the cheaper local bus that local people take that has more stops, but it also has more conversations that can enhance your life, that's a way of sort of creating friction in your life that helps you pay attention to it and get more out of it. I think that
Mm.
sometimes the travel industry, but also the online world, all these apps, they're made to reduce friction, to the point where you don't even have to. I'm terrible at learning languages, but you can. It's even easier to get your exact point across in a foreign place because you can turn on Google Translate or something. And when I was teaching some Swiss Italian students at a school in Lugano a couple weeks ago, and I was amazed how these young, wealthy people with all sorts of internet tools that I didn't have when I was their age are anxious about travel. For the same reason. It's like they're afraid of the friction that, to me, is the best part of travel. That there's all this uncertainty that they're anxious about. And, I don't want to knock them. I'm sure I was anxious about a ton of things when I was their age, but it's just like, that's the point, guys, that not really knowing what happens next, maybe not being able to afford the exact hotel room or hostel suite that you wanted. That's the point, that you make sacrifice and suddenly you're paying attention to your own life. One refrain that I bring up in the Vagabond's Way is dare to be lonely, lost, and bored, because those are the kinds of friction that are in our home life. We've had those things trained out of us, is that whenever we're lonely, we pick up our phone and chat with our mom or our friend, or yell at some stranger on some social media application. Whenever we're lost, we pull up our GPS and we're not lost anymore. And we pay less attention to our environment, which has always existed to help us find our way back to where we want to be. And then bored, that there's always some entertainment. And I'm guilty of this too. I like listening to podcasts. I mean, obviously this is going to be a podcast. So, but there's so many ways that we can sort of fill empty spaces now that we forget that boredom actually is this wonderful tool that allows us to harness our resources, to pay attention to things and realize that maybe this moment is not as bored as we feared it was.
I really appreciate that. I have been in so many situations where we had to solve problems on the road, and they're enduring. They last for a lifetime. I recall many. As you're saying that, they're flooding back to me, and the friction is good.
And when you say we, you mean you and
Oh,
your
me and my wife, we've been together
uh,
for 20 years. We
uh,
traveled around the world together, but
uh,
even last year, I was thinking we took our kids to Colombia. They were 6 and 8,
okay.
and we took a local bus for 5 hours, but it takes 9 hours by the time you get there. And our
Uh-huh.
kids still laugh at it that it took so long. And we got to Minka, and they had to put the luggage on the roof because there were just these little cars, and there's so much friction. But It's a good family story.
Oh, it is, and it's what you remember.
Yeah.
When my wife and I went to Vanuatu a couple years ago, the airline went out of business, and so we had to go from island to island on cargo ferries. She turned 45 on the deck of a cargo ferry, which wasn't her dream scenario, trying to fall asleep in a pile of peanut shells and cigarette butts. But it was so memorable. It was the kind of friction. We're glad we're not on that ferry anymore. We're
Yeah.
glad we're not taking a 16-hour ferry from Ifate to Malakula. But that was we experienced every microsecond of that journey, if not always in a comfortable way, in a memorable way,
You'll remember that on the birthdays.
for sure. Yeah.
As we come to a close here, I really appreciate your time. A big part of my work is chatting with people about, yeah, becoming involved in their lives. And that's why I like your book a lot. And a big part of my work is around our relationships with money. So I'm curious, after all these experiences that you've had, what do you feel like you've gotten right about money? And what was a learning lesson you had to overcome when it comes to money? And I'm not talking about investing or making money, more so the relationship or how you relate to it.
Yeah. It's funny that I've been very conservative with money, that I created that friction of traveling like a dirtbag when I was young, in part because I was saving money. I was putting money into a mutual fund, which is now in good shape, right? Very conservative, old school investment, but I sort of have that middle class stability that other people have without traveling, and not everybody has the blessing of being a travel writer and sort of being
Hmm.
able to embrace their lives in that way. But um, yeah, so I was able to make conservative financial I was able to have very rich travel experiences while still sort of seeding modest amounts of money that have since become less modest, and it's like, "Oh, yeah, I guess we are gonna be okay for our retirement, even if disaster befalls us." And so the flip side of that, I think, is that I'm coming into a relationship now. It's something that we're trying to think about now. It's just like, we have these things that we wanna do. How many good years do we have left? 30, 40? How are we gonna spend this time? And so I'm now coming into this relationship where I'm gonna have to figure out, well, how I've spent most of my life finding ways to become time wealthy by seeking experience. How can I use my actual money to find experiences that wouldn't have existed had I not spent money? And you don't want to be again, you don't want to throw money at everything in life, but like maybe we could go to Antarctica or spend some time, spend 2 months in the Alps or something. Um, and so I think weirdly enough, I think it's been good for me to pay better attention to the non-dirtbag level at which the world can be experienced. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying fly first class and stay in 5 stars all the time. And in fact, I think sometimes those are pretty superficial. Not to knock first class or first 5-star hotels, but I think that the really rich experiences lie beyond those sort of liminal places. But yeah, weirdly enough, I'm having to think, well, okay, I've established I'm not going to starve to death. I'm not going to live. Have to work until I'm 86 years old because I've saved and invested. So how am I going to spend this money in such a way that I just don't leave, money to the heirs that I don't have? And again, you want to leave one wants to earmark a little bit of their money for community sources too. But yeah, how am I going to use what money I have to make my life better? I've used that phrase many times before, but now I have a little bit more money, and so how am I going to use a little bit more money to find experiences that I might not have been able to touch 30 years ago when I had less of it? We'll see. Well, ask me in 20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Is still eating those roadside meals when you're traveling.
Oh man,
Ke-
that's a great option though.
It's
If
so good. I can't take it on myself.
Yeah, and if there's a lot of local people there, it's probably healthy. So no, I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of those spontaneous roadside food experiences.
I'm going to close this out here, but we were recently with a group of people in a Caribbean island, Antigua, and there was this nice big formal dinner, and it was tasty. But then I just had to get out of there, and I looked up some local restaurants in St. John's, the city there, and we found this wonderful curry house, and brought all these people to this old house and packed in there, and everyone just thought it was delicious. And I was like, I feel at home here.
Nice, nice. I love it.
I've got a question before I ask my final one but what is something that you're wrestling with right now that you're really thinking about?
I think it's spending time with family, actually. That my wife's parents are 10 years behind my parents, but my mom died last year, and we had just a great experience. They came over, we barbecued some salmon, we watched some baseball. It was very simple, but just realizing that we have a limited number of experiences. I just been thinking, anything with my dad, who is in his 80s, and I've been thinking a lot about sort of making the most of that time that we can't keep. We all age, and so I've really been thinking about ways to savor these experiences with my parents and Kiki's parents that we might not be able to have, that we probably won't be able to have in 20 years or more. So,
Yes, so true. Well, my final question is, let's imagine you're at end of life. Doesn't matter how old you are. You find yourself sitting on a porch looking out at a view that gives you complete peace, ease, and a feeling of content. You decide to write one more book about what you learned was a key to living a meaningful life. What would be the key message in that book?
I'm afraid to say it's attention, and maybe again this is auto-suggested, but I was just thinking, if it was on my porch, it would be a porch that I've yet to build here at my place in Kansas, and I'd be looking out at my cottonwood trees and my ponds and my grassland, and that would be what it would be about. Is that um, attention and curiosity, because I think curiosity feeds attention, and that there's many ways to lose curiosity, and one is to assume that you're seeing everything. And that I can look out from my porch and look at this landscape that seems very familiar to me. I could close my eyes and draw it. But what have I not seen there yet? How can I experience this in a deeper way? So that would probably be what it was about. That would be about what it would be about, because I think I don't mind being pigeonholed as a travel writer, but as I think you pointed out, that vagabonding isn't just about travel. It's about embracing life in a more engaged way. And so I think it would be about sitting still, and maybe we can only write one book. It would sort of be a sequel of Vagabonding, but it'd be about vagabonding in from your porch,
Mm,
in a way that attunes you to life even when you're at the end of it.
maybe there's a book in the making. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate your time. We'll include all of your books in the show notes. Anything specifically you'd like listeners to go find about, or yeah, I'll ask this better question. Where can the guests find you online?
Go to rolfpotts.com. It's no spaces, no capitalizations, rolfpotts.com. I've had that website for 28 years. I started that website
Oh,
in 1998. And I mean, it links to my Instagram, and it links to all my books. It links to articles I've written and podcast conversations like this one. But that's just, there's more about me than you ever want to know there, but you can dip in and find a few things to satiate your curiosity.
well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to chat with the author of a book that's informed much of my views on life. So thank you.
Good talking to you, Dave, Sean. Good luck in your journey.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. I really enjoy this conversation with Rolf and his perspective on time and money. While he doesn't have it always figured out, none of us really do. What I really liked from his story is that he didn't build a life of freedom by making more money and creating the stability that then afforded him to travel. He instead seemed to have renegotiated his relationship with money and time and just decided to go and do those things. And then the security and all the other things that made him feel comfortable came after. And I think most of us have the same freedom available to us right now. It's just we keep assuming it's still on the other side of getting enough. Before we head out, I have a reflective question for us today. Based on my conversation, I think this would be an appropriate question. Where in your life are you waiting for enough? And what would it look like to start before you get there? Because sometimes it's not the answers we learn from, but the questions. Thank you for tuning in. If you could please subscribe here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next week, take care.